background. I am 29 years old. I'm not quite to the old person age yet. I'm still a gamer. But I got my first computer at age 5. We had a little Texas Instrument thing that had these cartridges and you plugged it in. And they had a little manual that came with it that said how to program something. And you'd follow the manual and you'd type it in and you could program something. When I was age 8, my brother was in junior high and he got the school to give him a Tandy 1000 SX, which was 11 megahertz, the speed of the CPU. And if you're not sure, megahertz are a 1,000th of a gigahertz, which is what our CPUs are measured by now. And we've got somebody in the audience who probably is laughing and thinks, yeah, he knows something older than that, which is probably true. But for me, this is way back in the computer day. And I first started playing games on that Tandy 1000 with a CGA monitor. It had 16 colors. And there was a few games I loved on it, and it made an impact that lasted, until today. So after those, we got an Atari, and we got a Nintendo, and we got a Super Nintendo, and I've been hooked ever since. Video games just hit me, and it's more than just a goof-off thing for me. For many kids out there now, I'm a scout leader at the moment. I've got 11-year-old scouts that love to talk with me about video games, but it's a little different for me now than it is for these 11-year-old boys to just goof off. Video games are more of a higher level thing, not just something to goof off, not just a hobby for me, and I'm a little more serious with it. So I built up from the Super Nintendo. I had a Sega Genesis, a Game Boy, I have an Xbox 360, a Wii, and a PlayStation 2, and an Xbox. The only thing I don't have is a PS3. And I don't know if I'm going to get it. My wife's sitting in the back. She'll say $600. So I knew early that games were something I could love. When I was in high school, there was a game that came out called Ultima Online. It almost ended my high school career. It was the first, arguably, MMORPG that is massively multiplayer online role-playing game. And the guy who designed it, Lord British, his real name's Richard Garriott, is a guy who was known for his RPGs. He had made the Ultima series, and he came out with this game that a few hundred to 1,000, maybe 2,000 people could get on one server at a time and play with each other. And they would chat, and little words would pop up over their head, and you could talk to each other, and it was just a whole new experience for me. And that's when I knew MMO was something special for me. So after I weaseled my way out of high school, and in that I learned the dangers of games, the dangers of making a game that can be addictive. I'm LDS. I served a mission in the Philippines. I obviously didn't play any video games. I was doing charity work, I was teaching, I was doing things like that. I was away from video games, but when I was in the Philippines, when we'd go to write emails home to my family, in the internet cafes, there were kids that were playing Counter-Strike. There was kids playing StarCraft. There was kids playing just tons of games, and these kids can't afford computers. And that was just something that I always remember, that they can't afford a PC like we can here in America, but video games are still something that's tying them. They were playing against people in the United States. It was something that was taking people from the opposite side of the globe and connecting them together so they could form rivalries, so they could form friendships, so they could meet each other. Without video games, that wouldn't have happened. Without the internet, obviously, it wouldn't have happened either, but something for me is just always clicked with video games. So after I came back, I started studying psychology. Well, first I came back and I started taking generals to decide what it was that I really wanted to do. I took a psychology class and I knew that was it. Just like with video games, I knew psychology was the field which interested me. And psychology has always been, and going back to the Ultima Online days with addiction, psychology is going to study the motivation behind things. So I really was interested. I've written a few papers when I was in college about video games and addiction and how interesting it is. There's a guy on the internet who I believe he's a student at Stanford, could be wrong, his name is Nick Yee. He has started a project called the Daedalus Project. If you go to daedalusproject.com, I believe, he has written 5 or 6 or 10 different papers about MMORPGs and how they pertain to psychology, because that's his field. I think he was studying sociology, but it all ties together, and video games and psychology are really big. In the last presentation, there was some questions about how to become a designer, and I think as games progress, the demand for people who understand what makes people's psyches tick, what makes them motivated, what makes them excited, is going to be more and more of a factor. So having a background in psychology and how to understand why people like to play games is going to be more important. If you come up with gameplay that's going to, not like World of Warcraft, where it's going to make people want to keep playing, but not to the point where it's an addiction and they're, messing up their real lives, then you're going to be onto something that'll be good for you. So, in 2004, I beta tested a game that changed my life. The game was called Wish. It was made by Mutable Realms. It was this company that had first started as a networking company. They did some networking clustering, some technology that was underlying and actually underlied the game that they came out and decided to create, which was called Wish. So a year and a half into beta testing, maybe 2 years, they had a beta test phase 1, then they took some time off, closed beta, worked on the game some more, came out with a beta 2. Everybody was in it. On File Planet, it was the #1 download. They had 65,000 people registered to beta test it. 7 days after they opened it, they closed it, shut the doors, said, nope, we don't want to make this game anymore, it's too much of a financial risk. So that's where the financial area comes into video games that a lot of people don't realize. I'm sure most of you guys are gamers, you've been following games that have dropped off the face of the planet. There's lots of them. In the MMORPG market, that one's hit by ones that drop off more than anything else, because it costs more money to make an MMO than any other type of game. The development teams are much larger. There was a question in the earlier panel about artist to programming ratios. On some projects, it's like 1-to-1 ratio, 1 programmer to 1 artist, small ones. Like the people here were working on DS games, and Wii games, and Xbox 360 games. In MMORPGs, if you go to Blizzard in Irvine and you count how many artists they have, it's like a 2-to-1 artist ratio, because the amount of assets that's needed to create an MMO is just astronomical compared to the other types of games. So I saw this game, I liked it, they closed the doors, and I thought, what do I do now? That was going to be a pretty good game. I thought that one was going to be something to remember.